My name is Donna Smith. I am the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America. And I want to thank everybody who's here. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the nurses of National Nurses United. Not only was I honored to work for you for several years, but you have loved me through some pretty serious stuff, and I thank you very much. The other thing that I would thank you for is PDA may have been, as Michael Lighty mentioned this morning, our founder, Tim Carpenter, and our political director, Steve Cobble, were two of the people who really were the impetus for Bernie to run. But without the engine and the fire of National Nurses United, I can't imagine that Bernie's revolution would have gone as far as it has. And I think we all owe them a huge debt of gratitude. So, enough from me. You're going to hear from some pretty wonderful people. And as you know, these folks served during the campaign as surrogates. But I want to promise you something. I don't think of any of these three people as surrogates for anyone. I think of each of them as leaders in their own right. And whenever we get the feeling that the electoral side of our work does not matter, they are proof that it does matter. And the government can still be ours if we work hard enough to make it that way. So first, we're going to hear from Chuy Garcia. Chuy, my hometown of Chicago. Yeah. What did you do but challenge that Rahm Emanuel, huh? Yeah. Yeah. Currently sitting as a county commissioner. Thank goodness they need him there. He's done so very much for us, and we're running a little bit behind, and I want you to hear from them. So Chuy, come on up and tell us a little bit. What we really want to hear is how do we take this wonderful energy of movement and translate it into our electoral work? How do we make that transition best? And I think these folks will give us some good insight. So Chuy, the stage is yours for about 8 minutes.
Good afternoon, sisters and brothers, progressives from all over the country. I want to welcome you to Chicago, the city that has many, many characteristics and things to be very proud of. Chicago, after all, is the birthplace of the fight for the 8-hour day and the abolition of child labor in our country. We salute the Chicago martyrs. Chicago, more recently, was also the birthplace of a movement for immigrants' rights that has created among the largest mobilizations of immigrants and allies in the history of our country. We stand with immigrants everywhere in our country and everywhere in the world. 33 years ago, we made history when we also elected the first African-American mayor, and a progressive at that, Congressman Harold Washington, Chicago's first African-American and progressive mayor. In Chicago and Cook County, at Cook County government, we were also the first entity in the country to say that we will respect, embrace, and make immigrants a part of all of our communities, and we cease cooperation with secure communities or any repackaged program that scapegoats and stereotypes and profiles immigrants. Immigrants are welcome in Cook County. Welcome to Cook County also. In Chicago, in the last year, we stood up and we fought against the policies of the 1% as we challenged the tale of two cities in the 2015 mayoral election, as we forced the city's first runoff ever, including 18 runoffs in city council seats, the people are on the move in Chicago. Although we came up short in our endeavor, which had little time to prepare, we have laid the basis for a truly multiracial, multi-ethnic, across faith, LGBT inclusive community in Chicago. The future is bright. We need to nurture and advance the movement of all of our communities and our people in Chicago as well as the rest of our country. So those are some of the developments that we draw inspiration from as we gather here at the People's Summit. But Chicago, truth be told, is at a real crucial point in its existence. We have a perfect storm in our city. The criminal justice system has been exposed, and there are great deficiencies, there are great problems in the criminal justice system, and it came on the heels of the release of videos which show the need for serious criminal justice reform in Chicago, in Cook County, and in the state of Illinois. The perfect crisis includes violence that is out of control, that will make our city the most violent in over 20 years if the current trends continue. The crisis also features things like an underfunded school system that is ending a year with a $500 million deficit and a projected $1.2 billion deficit for the following school year. The crisis is serious. Unemployment, especially among youth of color, particularly African American youngsters who are out of work and out of school, are the greatest serious to the health of the city of Chicago. We don't have a state budget. It has now been nearly a year that we have not had a state budget, in part due to the fact that we have a billionaire governor in the state of Illinois who wants to take the state back in time like Wisconsin and like Michigan have done. Illinois will not become a right-to-work state, and we stand firm in our resolve to move the state in a progressive direction. At the core of our demands and our agenda is that the only way for Illinois to move forward is to institute a system of progressive and fair taxation so we can have good schools, good health care, good social services, and opportunity for everyone in our state. So, sisters and brothers, with the conclusion of the primary for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States, it is an opportune time to be gathering and coming together and charting paths for the future. We have the responsibility of ensuring that we continue to fight for the development of vehicles, electoral and otherwise, to continue the movement that we have built. The empowerment of minorities in Chicago is essential, given that Chicago today is largely a third African American, a third white, a third Latino and Asian and Muslim, and all of our sisters and brothers, including a vibrant LGBTQ community. We're continuing our fight against the 1%. Its representatives in Chicago, like Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who only advance an agenda that focuses much attention and energy and tax dollar resources in building the new shiny city at the core of Chicago while ignoring neighborhoods across the city of Chicago. It is one of the reasons that I stood with Bernie Sanders early on, because I knew that the only way forward in a new economy that works for all was a massive jobs program to rebuild America's cities and America's infrastructure and put people back to work at scale, at a massive scale. It's the only way out for the crisis that cities and towns and many localities are suffering from. We continue our forward struggle by taking stock of all of the gains that were made during this primary presidential cycle. Over 12 million votes were cast for Bernie Sanders, an unprecedented amount of fundraising that went on with the contributions of little people all over the country. You've heard the story. It is a great phenomenon that we need to continue to build on as we move forward. But as we move forward, we've got to be able to do it at the local level to begin with. In Chicago, we have continued to make strides here fighting against the machine, fighting against racism and divisiveness. We've built a solid coalition that can move forward. We made additional gains this year in different municipal districts where progressive committeemen and women were elected. The possibilities are really ripe for continued action as we move into legislative races next year. As we move into the mayoral election of 2019, the movement can be nurtured, grown, and we can have victory. We also have new possibilities to impact the state legislature. In Illinois, even though we have supermajorities in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, because of a one-percenter in the governor's chair, we have not been able to address many of the pressing issues, including fair tax reform in Illinois. But we have grown in terms of the momentum and the conversation around what are viable revenue options for the future, particularly to fund education and the over-reliance on property taxes in the city of Chicago, which makes Chicago unaffordable and displace poor people, and continue the pattern of racial patterns of housing that have made Chicago a segregated city and one that has two hollowed out areas that are primarily African American, with the highest levels of unemployment, the highest levels of violence, the highest levels of health disparities. That's got to change. Our progressive agenda can make that a reality. And in Springfield, there is reason to be optimistic that we can continue our forward movement. We're proud that in Illinois this year, we elected the first Asian American state representative in the history of the state of Illinois through a great coalition that came as part of the movement for Bernie Sanders' nomination. As we take stock of all that has happened, I simply have to tell you that the movement and the conversations that have taken place around inequality, around the need for a new agenda, around the Democratic Party changing its platform and ensuring that the causes that were championed so boldly by Bernie Sanders continue to move our country forward. It's the only way to ensure the sustainability of our country, the development of all of our people, and to save the planet from global warming and climate change, sisters and brothers. So we will have an opportunity to talk a little bit later. Just wanted to sort of share the Chicago context, the crisis that we're living in, and why it is so important to nurture and cultivate this movement that has changed the equation in American politics. What we have achieved through a great champion like Bernie Sanders and the participation of so many ordinary people that became the campaign for a progressive form and a progressive voice in the Democratic Party needs to be continued and nurtured. It's the only way forward. I welcome you to the city of Chicago and the county of Cook and look forward to continuing to engage with you as we move forward. Finally, it is very clear that one of the things that was lacking in the campaign was a greater role at all levels of communities of color. As we move forward, we have got to ensure that African Americans and Asians and Muslims and Latinos all over the country are involved in all of the tables and discussions and strategic decision making. We're very proud that in places like Illinois and Nevada and many other localities and Iowa, Latinos in majority voted for Bernie Sanders. And part of that reason is that young voters who registered for the first time, dreamers, and many other activists that come from the immigrants' rights movements in all of these communities made a difference. The movement for racial justice and criminal justice reform was another factor. The future can be bright if we're truly inclusive, nurturing, and ensure that all of our communities are represented in a movement for racial equity and racial justice. Thank you so much, sisters and brothers.
Okay, Chicago, he would have been a great mayor, huh? Woo! Governor Chewy. Go figure. Maybe they'd finally be able to take that wing out of the state prison that's reserved for governors, former governors of Illinois. Sorry. A native Illinois girl, what can I say? Nina Turner. Nina Turner. Sister, wow, do we love you. Oh my God. For those of you who have the app, you can go and read her full bio because I don't want to take time away from you hearing from her. She's so fabulous. When I first read about her, and this was many months ago, and learned all the things that she has risen above in her life, I thought this is a woman who demonstrates in her life's journey what it's all about to keep this movement moving forward for justice in this country. A former state senator in Ohio, very active in the state Democratic Party. I'll bet you caused him a lot of trouble, and thank you for that. There is so much about her. Let's hear from Nina Turner about no surrogate to anyone.
Hello.
Is it on? Maybe they turned it on.
Oh, People Summit. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. We will fight on. When I say fight, you say on. Fight. 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 Oh, we gonna fight on. Oh my God. Madam President, I just want to thank you so much to dear Winnie and Roseanne, other organizations that had the vision and the courage to put something like this together, that you all are doing the daggone thing on behalf of the people, and I am so proud. And can I say something? I've never met anybody like the nurses. Man, y'all done took nursing to a whole nother level, traveling the entire country, making it known that we need to have single-payer health care in this country and nothing less. We will not accept anything less. I got to give a shout out to Commissioner Garcia and my sister in the elected ministry, the Congresswoman. You know, we have been on the road together for a mighty long time in support of a man who has lived his convictions in the personage of Senator Bernie Sanders. Can we give him a shout out this afternoon? In his absence, let's give him a shout out this afternoon for taking it to the establishment like nobody else ever has. But to all of you who are out here this afternoon, there is no movement without you. You make the difference. So as the commissioner was laying out there, this is a pivotal time in our nation's history. And we don't have time, if I can use the technical term, the okie doke. If I can use a technical term, we don't have time for people who run for office, but they want to whisper sweet nothings in our ear. We don't have time for that. We mean business. So when we look at income and wealth inequality in this country, and we heard our senator talk about that all across this country, do you know that we have been dealing with candidates for far too long who wouldn't even say the word poor, who won't say the word poverty? Well, how many of us know that we do have poor sisters and brothers in this country who are trying their very best to make it into the middle class, and we have middle class sisters and brothers in this country who are trying to hold on, and it is time out for that. There are about 100 million people in this nation. About half of them live in poverty, and the other half, they're on the brink of poverty. That we need folks elected to office who actually give a shit about the people that they represent. I'm just gonna put it on out there. We're not going back to business as usual. And I don't care what their party affiliation is, whether they be Democrat or Republican, we need to form the party of the RT, and that is the party of the right thing. Can I get an amen? And speaking of reform, I got to give a shout out. You will see, I want you to pick up these, the Reform Party, hashtag reform the party, hashtag reform the party. We're going to do something with this. We have massive assaults on our voting rights throughout this country, and we got to do something about that. How many of you know that it will be 3 years since Shelby versus Holder on June 25th? The greatest equalizer, progressives, that we have in this country is one woman, one man, one vote, and we can't stand for folks who want to attack the ballot box. It is happening all over this country, but it is unconscionable that the Congress has not moved in 3 years to correct it. We got to do something about that. As the commissioner talked about, we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need gun reform. I'm glad to see the Dems standing up and filibustering in the Senate. You know, it is a sin and a shame. It is a sin and a shame that we got to beg folks in the Congress to do what is right. Sandy Hook didn't move them. What just happened to our sisters and brothers in Orlando didn't move them. The countless murders and gun violence that we see in urban areas in this country every single day doesn't move them. Will people summit? Let me tell you what's going to move them. Let's elect some people in the office and get them out the way. They don't want to move. They don't want to do what is right. Nobody's trying to take away the Second Amendment to the Constitution of these United States of America, but people have a right to live a good quality life, and all of us have a responsibility to make sure that guns do not fall in the hands of the wrong people. So progressive movement, I'm all off my notes. I was in Burlington, Vermont last night. My husband and I were very honored because Senator Sanders asked me to keynote for him at the Vermont Democratic Party on his behalf. And I read a quote from Teddy Roosevelt that I want to read when Teddy Roosevelt talked about the man in the arena. And I'm only going to read a portion of that when he said that the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, or woman, but I'm reading his words, whose face is mired by the dust and the sweat and the blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds. Sisters and brothers, in my remaining time, I want to talk to you about doers of the deeds. Because it is time out for people talking about it. We want them to be doers of the deeds. Politics is about who has the power and who they leverage that power for. And for far too long in this country, we have elected people to office who leverage the power on behalf of the 1% and have left the 99 behind. We need more doers of the deeds. And you don't have to have a fancy title to be a doer of the deeds. You see, titles are good, but purpose is better. Titles are good, but purpose is better. And each and every one of us can live out our purpose to making sure that we are going to stand up for social justice, for racial equality, for women to have their whole damn dollar. Women say whole damn dollar. For our babies to be educated. And in order for us to do this, we have to commit ourselves that we have the courage and the chutzpah to speak truth to power, to organize, to stay together, to put our list of demands, and not to relent one iota on the things that we believe in. Doers of the deeds. So sisters and brothers, in my last 2 minutes and 30 seconds, can a sister tell you a story? I got to come off the stage. Because I believe in being in front of the people. So there are 3 things, People Summit, that I want you to remember. If you don't remember anything else I've had to say here this afternoon, 3 things. That I believe that the creator of this great universe has given us 2 hands, one to reach forward and one to reach back, lifting as we climb. We are our sisters and our brothers' keepers. Number two, and most importantly, we can't ask other folks to do more for us than we are willing to do for ourselves. I think Brother Frederick Douglass put it this way. He said, you might not get everything that you work for, you will work for everything that you get. It is work to be done. We need doers of the deeds. Can I just testify? And I know I'm running out of time. But one of the reasons, besides the fact that my husband said to me, baby, I think Senator Sanders is your candidate, you need to rethink your position. But when I juxtaposition my life story with what this man was standing for, having a mother who died at the young age of 42 years old with her dreams deferred. I was 22 years old and my baby sister was 12. 7 kids. My mother snuffed out and she died on the system of welfare. She didn't have a life insurance policy. She didn't have any money in the bank. But she did the very best that she could for 7 babies. When I thought about how Senator Sanders was fighting for $15 minimum wage for poor people in this country, I said, he's talking about my mama. When he talked about universal health care as a right, he was talking about my mama. When he talks about making sure that our young people are not saddled with debt as they walk across the stage with their degrees, he was talking about people like me who are first-generation college graduates and who became cycle breakers because of the power of education. We need doers of the deed. And that's why People's Summit, the math may not have been in Senator Sanders' favor, but baby, the social studies is in his favor. Universal health care, raising the minimum wage, doing something about climate change and gun violence and an unjust justice system that locks up black and brown folks in this country. The social studies is on his side. The social studies is on our side. I'm full this afternoon. We're not going for the okie doke no more. We're not going for the okie doke no more. No more. No more. We need doers of the deed. We need doers of the deeds. Doers of the deed. And lastly, in the words of my grandmother, who was hailed from the South, my grandmother could not read or write, but sisters and brothers, she could count her money. And she kept her money in the Southern Ladies Bank and Trust with a handkerchief. When I asked my grandmother, what does it take to be successful in life, she said, all you need are the 3 bones, the wishbone, the jawbone, and the backbone. She said the wishbone will give you courage to hope, because hope is the motivator, but the dream is the driver. She said the jawbone will give you courage to speak truth to power. I want you to lift your voice and not just be comfortable with being in the room. But the most important bone of them all, the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious bone, is the backbone, because the backbone will keep you standing through all of your trials and your tribulations. And People's Summit, we're going to go through some stuff, but we can't have a testimony without a test. And we are being tested, whether we have courage enough, conviction enough, people power enough to stand up and do what is right for ourselves and generations yet unborn. If you are a doer of the deed, I want you to stand up to your feet right now and say, I am a doer of the deeds. God bless you.
Wow. Now, I've had to follow some tough things in my time, but that's something else, isn't it? No surrogate there. Our third panelist is somebody who is I think, just such a fabulous representation of what can be right with our government and government by the people. Many of you know that in February, Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, chose to leave her position at the DNC. In a principled stance for all of us to work on behalf of Bernie Sanders' campaign. Now, how few of our current politicians can we say in a principled stance about? There's so many good things to say about Tulsi Gabbard. I want to say a couple of things about the first time I met her. It was on your home turf, Congresswoman. And I was very nervous, as I am today, but I was in Honolulu. She had agreed to do an event there right before their presidential primary. 600 people gathered on a Friday night to listen to Tulsi Gabbard in a little club. And they were feeling, some of them, a little bit like Hawaii doesn't have very many electoral votes to offer the country. And I said to them, oh, don't you fear for 1 minute. You gave us a lot more than what Hawaii's votes were. You gave us delegates from all over the country because you gave us Tulsi. And I want to say, as soon as she didn't stop working, as soon as the campaign was kind of winding down a little bit, I got calls right away from staff members of hers asking us to really get some energy around a couple of things, and I want to share those with you so that you put some energy into it. She is currently running a petition to end superdelegates at the DNC. All you have to do is text reform to 83224. 83224. Just text reform to 83224, and you can be a part of Tulsi's petition. Let's give her lots of signatures. And she's also working very hard on H.R. 4108, which is to end regime change in Syria. The tragedy that's happening in that part of the world is awful. So with no further ado, Tulsi, welcome to my home turf, my hometown of Chicago, Illinois. Aloha, and welcome here.
Aloha. What a beautiful crowd. I'm incredibly inspired and so thrilled to be here to join you today, to join Commissioner Garcia, Senator Turner, Donna Smith, Roseanne, DeMauro, Winnie, all of you who have worked so hard to make today possible and who are working even harder to lay out the path for how we can make sure we continue progress on all of these important issues. There's so much at stake as we look at the next 5 months before us, but also how we engage beyond that. We've got to make sure that our voices are heard, whether it's on environmental protection, healthcare, education, criminal justice reform, Social Security, jobs, veterans, campaign finance reform, and so much more. There's one issue that impacts all the rest. If we continue to spend trillions of dollars on these costly interventionist regime change wars, overthrowing dictators in countries that we don't like, the fact is we will not be able to afford to make any real progress on the change that we need right here at home. Now, the very reason why we're gathered here as progressives is because we care about the well-being of others. We care about our future. We're soft-hearted people who have aloha, respect, and compassion for others, and we never want to be in a position to see anyone suffering. As a result, for some, it may be easy to believe that well, maybe we should support a regime change war if we believe that war will relieve human suffering. Proponents of the interventionist wars in Libya and in Iraq argued that these actions were justified because of humanitarian concerns. It was pointed out over and over again that these countries were in the grips of these evil dictators who had to be removed. This is precisely the same argument that is being used today to justify our war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad. Hoping to garner the support of the American people, proponents of these regime change wars routinely cite humanitarian concerns to justify this military intervention in foreign countries. But here's the reality. As a direct result of our intervention in Iraq, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, human suffering there has increased dramatically. Terrorist organizations such as ISIS and al-Qaeda took advantage of the Maliki Shia-led government that persecuted and oppressed the Sunni people. ISIS therefore gained a stronghold in Iraq, kidnapping, terrorizing, raping, and killing thousands and thousands of innocent people. In Libya, when the U.S. led the bombing campaign to overthrow Gaddafi, which began with a no-fly zone, the result was incredible loss of life, total chaos, with Libya resulting in a failed state and a haven now for ISIS and other terrorist organizations. There is no denying that the interventionist wars in Iraq and Libya that were propagated as necessary to relieve human suffering have in fact increased human suffering in those countries many times over. There's an old saying that's very relevant to what's facing us here today, that the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. Unfortunately, even after seeing how disastrous these wars in Iraq and Libya were, many people who championed those wars are now advocating for the very same thing all over again. Another regime change war for humanitarian reasons, this time in Syria, to overthrow a dictator that we don't like. There's not one but two wars that are being waged in Syria. First is a war to defeat ISIS, al-Qaeda, and other jihadist groups. This is a war against terrorists who've declared war on America, and it's a war that we must win. The second is the counterproductive war to overthrow the government of Assad, an illegal war that Congress has not authorized and which must end. This war to overthrow the Syrian government has strengthened rather than weakened our enemies like ISIS. Working with countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, we are fueling a brutal civil war that's caused the deaths of over 400,000 Syrians and millions more refugees fleeing their homes. The fact is, if this war is successful and the Assad government is overthrown, the strongest force that exists in Syria that will take over in Syria is ISIS and al-Qaeda. This will result in a far worse humanitarian disaster, refugee crisis, and a genocide against religious minorities, secularists, atheists, LGBT, and anyone who does not prescribe to this specific extreme ideology. What to speak of the fact that this will present an even greater security threat to the region and to the world. Just the other day, we heard news of 51 State Department diplomats calling on President Obama to bomb the Syrian government. Unfortunately, this is not surprising. These kinds of bombings and escalation are what will occur if Secretary Clinton does what she says she will do as president and establish a so-called no-fly zone in Syria, an action that would cost billions of dollars, tens if not hundreds of thousands of ground troops, as well as a massive U.S. air presence. This action will escalate this war to overthrow the Syrian government, causing more death, more destruction, more chaos, more refugees, all the while strengthening groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda. the very first action that must be taken when implementing a no-fly zone in Syria would be to bomb Russian and Syrian anti-aircraft defense systems. This would lead our country into a direct confrontation with the world's other nuclear power, Russia. Too many people have not learned from the past. They've learned nothing from Iraq and that overthrow of Saddam Hussein. They've learned nothing from overthrowing Gaddafi in Libya and the chaos that has ensued as a result, where ISIS has now been declared as having their strongest and most dangerous foothold. The only way to prevent this escalation, the only way to prevent this disaster from increasing is for the American people, us, to come out strongly now before another administration comes into power and say that this war to overthrow the Syrian government must end now. This can only happen if Congress and the administration hears your voices. Just on Thursday, a couple days ago, I offered an amendment on the House floor to the Department of Defense Appropriations bill that would have begun this process of ending this interventionist war in Syria. 135 bipartisan members of Congress voted for this amendment. It failed, however, because too many of our Democratic members, many of whom consider themselves to be progressive, voted against it. Many who are well-intentioned, but who need to understand that this war, just like the one in Iraq, just like the one in Libya, will not help the Syrian people. It will simply compound the devastation, suffering, and chaos, making their lives worse than ever before. As Donna mentioned, I've introduced a bill, H.R. 4108, that would end any and all funding for this regime change war in Syria, and I urge each and every one of you to call your member of Congress to support this bill so that we can end this war now. This is an issue that we'll have to continue to fight on, but it's an issue that confronts us right now, because we know there are people in this administration and the State Department who are trying to pressure and convince President Obama to escalate this war. We have to let him know that the solution is not an escalation of this war, but rather what's needed is an end to this regime change war in Syria. President Obama showed tremendous courage back in 2013. It was my first year in Congress, when he chose not to carry out airstrikes against the Assad government to begin yet another war. He needs to hear from us to exercise that same courage once again. Whether it's through a petition, sending letters, social media, letting your member of Congress know, we need to send a strong message that this war must end. Many of you stood up bravely and courageously and protested the war in Vietnam. Many of you stood up and bravely and courageously protested the war in Iraq. Many of you did the same, protesting the war to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya. And so now I'm asking you to stand up and do the same. Stand with me and demand an end to this war to overthrow the government of Assad. Demand an end to all interventionist regime change wars. We need to let leaders in Washington know that we will not stand idly by and allow this nation to escalate an already deadly, devastating war. We need to let leaders in Washington know that we do not support overthrowing any dictator we want, acting as the world's police, acting as if it's America's responsibility to use our military to attempt to remake the world in the image that we choose. We need to let leaders in Washington know that we must stop wasting our valuable, precious, limited resources on these regime change wars and instead focus those resources on investing and rebuilding and strengthening our communities right here at home. We can't afford to do both. The power that's in this room, by each of you gathered from all parts of our country, representing the conversations and debates and engagement that's occurring in each of our communities on important issues like this, engaging in our democratic process, many people for the first time feeling empowered, recognizing that the true power in our country lies in your hands, in our hands, in the hands of the people, and it is through our work and our voices and our action that we can truly effect this kind of change that our country so desperately needs. Thank you very much for all that you're doing. We've got to work together to continue this path going forward. Aloha. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Roseanne DeMauro wants to say a few words to all of you. Roseanne.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, PDA, for giving us Donna. Wow, was this panel amazing? Well, before I say this, first of all, we're trending number 2 on Twitter. Let's make that number 1. People Summit, number 1 on Twitter. Let's do it. Okay? But Chewy, do we hear a mayoral race somewhere in there? Does that sound right? Chewy? Chicago? Chewy? And Nina. Nina. I hear you're not doing anything lately. What do you think? Yeah. How many of you would work for Nina Turner? Stand up. Nina! And the other offer is Tulsi's running in Hawaii this year. How many of you want to go to Hawaii with me and help her? But seriously, I just have to say these are the most exemplary examples of how you can actually run for office and maintain your humanity and be a warrior for the people. And these people, I've been there. I know what they go through, the threats, the everything, the being ostracized. But all of the threat, everything, it's all there, it hangs over. And these are some powerful administrations. Don't think because it's got the word Democrat in it that it's nice. So we always have to support them. And you know, I'm looking at Sean King sitting here. Sean King, you're awesome. So, Winnie Wong, when you get a tweet about one of these people, that means help. We want to help these people move up all the way in our government. We want them to be the future leaders of tomorrow, and we want many more like them. Thank you all so much for everything that you've done for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We love you.